She walked in alone, wearing a simple dress and carrying nothing but a quiet smile. The grand gates loomed above her, and the whispers started almost immediately. People laughed softly behind her back, calling her foolish, saying she was out of place. In a world where appearances speak louder than words, no one could understand why a woman like her, humble, unassuming, would show up to an open house for a multi-million-dollar mansion. The real estate agent barely hid her surprise, and the other visitors simply ignored her. She didn't seem like a buyer. She didn't even look like she belonged there. But what they didn't know was that she wasn't there to impress anyone. She was waiting for someone they hadn't expected. Her husband. This is a story about quiet strength, unexpected wealth, and the assumptions we make about people just by looking at them. It's about how quickly the world can judge a person who chooses simplicity over flash. But most of all, it's a story about love, and the kind of success that doesn't need to shout to be real. What no one saw coming was the moment her husband pulled up. No fancy entrance, no loud engine, just calm confidence. And when he stepped into that mansion, everything changed. Suddenly, the laughter stopped. The whispers turned into questions. And that so-called foolish woman? She became the center of everyone's attention. But what did he say? Why did he come at all? And what happened next that left everyone speechless? Stay with me, because this story isn't just about a house. It's about how people reveal their true worth when it matters most. And trust me, the best part is just getting started. He didn't walk in wearing a suit or carrying a briefcase. There was no flash of gold on his wrist, no expensive sunglasses, just an ordinary man in jeans and a clean shirt, calm and quiet like his wife. But the way he held himself, confident, steady, made people stop and look again. No one knew who he was, but something about him made it hard to look away. The agent, who had barely paid attention to the woman earlier, suddenly straightened up. "Are you here to see the property?" she asked, her tone changing. He nodded and smiled, walking over to his wife like she was the only person in the world. They didn't talk much, just exchanged a glance that said everything. He took her hand, and together they began to walk through the mansion. Now the same people who had dismissed her were whispering again, but this time for a different reason. Questions floated in the air. Who were they? Why were they so calm? And more importantly, could they actually afford the house? As the couple moved from room to room, they didn't seem surprised by the high ceilings, the marble floors, or the designer fixtures. It was almost like they had seen better, like they weren't here to be impressed, but to decide. The other, visitors, dressed in designer clothes, started following them from a distance, pretending to admire the house while watching their every move. It was clear something was different. What made this simple woman walk into a mansion with such quiet confidence? Why did she stand alone for so long, without flinching at the stares and whispers? And who was this man? This husband who didn't seem to care about showing off yet held the power to change the whole room. That day, no one saw what was coming. But the moment of truth was getting closer. The mansion was stunning, no doubt about it. Every corner spoke of luxury, custom woodwork, imported tiles, floor-to-ceiling windows with sweeping views. But while others admired the house with wide eyes and big talk, the quiet couple walked slowly, thoughtfully, saying little. The woman occasionally ran her fingers over the railings, tapped on the windows, checked the hinges of doors. She wasn't just looking, she was inspecting. Like she knew what mattered and what didn't. A man in a sharp gray suit watched them from across the living room. He had arrived earlier in a luxury car, confidently throwing out numbers, hinting at business deals and bank approvals. He had assumed he'd be the one walking away with the keys. But now, he was growing restless, noticing how the agent's attention was shifting toward the couple. His smirk faded as he tried to listen in, but they spoke quietly, only to each other. Whispers continued. One woman leaned toward her friend and said, "Maybe they're just here to dream. You know, look around and pretend for a while." Another laughed and added, "That's what I thought, until he started asking about the foundation and ownership history." The agent, clearly caught between appearances and reality, was beginning to sense that this wasn't just a curious pair. They were serious. The man asked precise questions about taxes, zoning laws, the builder's reputation. Not flashy questions, but the kind that real buyers ask. Still, no one could piece together who they were. No big names, no recognizable faces. Just a simple woman and her calm, unreadable husband who seemed to carry the weight of something more. What was their story? Where had they come from? And why did this mansion matter so much? As the tour reached the final room, a decision was about to be made. But not by who everyone expected. The final room was a private study, quiet, tucked away at the back of the house, with rich wooden shelves and soft afternoon light spilling through tall windows. It was the kind of room that felt personal, like it held secrets. The couple stepped inside, and for a moment, everything went still. The woman stood in the center, looking around carefully. Her husband didn't say a word. He just watched her. Behind them, the others hesitated in the hallway. Some pretended not to be interested anymore, but their eyes kept drifting back, waiting to see what would happen next. The man in the gray suit lingered close to the agent, trying to stay in her ear. "I can wire the deposit right now," he said, his voice louder than before, like he needed everyone to hear. "No delays, no conditions. Let's lock this down today." The agent forced a polite smile but kept glancing toward the study. Her instinct was telling her something she hadn't expected, something she couldn't ignore. Inside the room, the woman turned to her husband and nodded slightly. It was subtle, but it was enough. He stepped forward and asked the agent, "Can we speak privately?" That request alone changed the mood. The other visitors exchanged looks. The man in the gray suit stiffened, his fingers tightening around his phone. The woman who'd been mocking earlier now fell completely silent. As the agent followed them in, the door gently closed behind her. For the first time all day, no one could hear what was being said. The tension outside that door grew heavy. Everyone stood waiting, some out of curiosity, others out of disbelief. What was happening in that room? Who were they really? And what could they possibly be discussing that would cause the agent's expression to change as soon as she walked out? Something big was about to happen. But no one was ready for it. When the door finally opened, the real estate agent's expression had shifted. She wasn't just surprised, she looked stunned. Her usual polished tone was gone as she cleared her throat and addressed the group still lingering in the hallway. "Thank you all for coming," she said, voice slightly shaky. "At this time, the property is no longer available for viewing." The reaction was instant. Gasps. Protests. A few people tried to argue, asking if there had been a mistake. The man in the gray suit stepped forward, visibly annoyed. "What do you mean? I already offered more than the asking price. I can double the deposit right now." But she didn't budge. "The decision's been made," she said quietly. Inside the study, the couple remained calm. They weren't gloating or celebrating. Instead, they stepped out quietly, as if this had all gone exactly as planned. That's when the second twist hit. Someone in the crowd recognized them. A younger man, dressed casually but holding a high-end camera, whispered, "Wait, that's Daniel Ortega, the real estate investor from those low-profile projects out in the countryside. The one who buys rundown farms and turns them into eco-villages." The name rippled through the room like a current. Daniel Ortega, known in small, serious circles but never flashy. He'd built quiet wealth, made smart investments in forgotten places, and apparently now, He was ready to move into the city. And the woman? She was his partner in every way, on paper and in life. While people laughed at her for coming alone, she had been quietly assessing what would soon become theirs. Now everyone was left staring, caught between embarrassment and awe. They hadn't just judged the wrong people, they'd completely missed the story unfolding right in front of them. But why this mansion? Why now? And what deal had been made behind that closed door? The answers were coming, but not yet. As the fiancé couple reached the front door, the tension in the room was thick. No one dared to speak, but eyes followed them like shadows. Daniel paused, turned back slightly, and gave a polite nod to the crowd. Then, for the first time, his wife spoke. Her voice was calm, but carried weight. People think silence means weakness, but sometimes it just means we're listening and remembering. With that, they stepped outside, and the heavy wooden door closed behind them. The room behind them was left in stunned silence. The man in the gray suit stood frozen, still gripping his phone, unable to process what had just happened. He had come in thinking the house was his. Instead, he'd watched it slip away to a woman he didn't even think belonged there. But the biggest surprise came just moments later. The agent pulled out her phone, made a call, and said, "Yes, they've agreed. Full cash offer, no contingencies. But there's a condition. They want to keep the former owner's original garden intact. They said it reminded them of where they started." That's when the final twist was revealed. The house wasn't just a purchase. It was a return. Years ago, before the renovations, before the luxury upgrades, this had been the house Daniel's wife cleaned as a teenager. Back then, no one even noticed her. She used to mop those very floors after school, quietly dreaming of something more. She had never forgotten the house, or the way people treated her when they thought she had nothing. Now, she owned it, and she didn't buy it to prove anyone wrong. She bought it to honor where she came from. The whispers had turned into silence. The looks of judgment had turned into quiet respect. And just like that, the simple woman no one saw coming had the last word. Outside, the sun was starting to set, casting a warm golden light over the front steps as the couple stood together, looking back at the mansion. It wasn't about the house anymore. It was about the full circle they had just come around. Years ago, she'd walked those same steps with cleaning supplies in hand, unnoticed and invisible. Now, she held the keys not just to a building, but to a life she had built slowly, quietly, and with purpose. Back inside, the crowd had thinned. The man in the gray suit left without another word. A few others stayed behind, pretending to look at the kitchen one last time, but everyone knew the story had already been written. The woman they'd called a fool had turned out to be the only one who truly understood the value of the place, not just in price, but in meaning. The real estate agent, still a little shaken, watched them from the window. She would later admit that she almost missed it. That moment when she realized the most important buyers in the room weren't the loudest, richest-looking ones. They were the quietest, the ones who moved with intention. Word of the sale spread quickly, not because it was the most expensive deal she'd made, but because of who made it. People started retelling the story in their own words. Some called it inspiring, others called it a lesson, but no one forgot it. In the end, what stood out wasn't the money, or even the mansion. It was the grace of a woman who didn't let judgment change her path. A woman who remembered where she came from, but never let it define where she was going. So the next time you see someone who doesn't look the part, pause for a moment. You might just be standing next to someone who already owns everything you're chasing.